The slap didn't sound like skin on skin. It sounded like fine china cracking in a quiet museum. My glasses sailed from my face, skittered across the polished walnut floor of the Blue Magnolia Manor ballroom, and shattered beneath a crystal chandelier that threw 1,000 indifferent stars across 130 stunned guests. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest spread like frost. Melanie, my brand-new daughter-in-law in silk, that cost more than my car, lowered her hand with theatrical precision and smiled at me the way a wolf smiles at a fence. "That's what you get for being selfish," she said, voice bright enough to slice. "A woman your age doesn't need that much space. Jason and I need your apartment. We need privacy to start our real life." People looked anywhere but at me. A cousin stared hard at a centerpiece. A groomsman coughed into a napkin. My son Jason studied the gleam of his shoe as if it contained scripture. The quartet stopped on a dissonant chord that vibrated in the rafters, then fell into a silence so complete I could hear the click of my own throat when I swallowed. I crouched, old habit, and gathered the warped frames and glass, the way I've gathered my pride, my patience, and the slivers of respect people drop when they think you're too gentle to bend down and pick them up. The chandelier blades sent spears of light into my eyes, and the room tilted for just a breath. I stood slowly, smoothed the vintage dress Melanie had mocked earlier. "Vintage, how brave," she'd said. I searched for Jason's face. He didn't raise his head. "You're not welcome in our home anymore." Melanie continued, resettling her veil, as if the air itself had misbehaved. "You create drama. You refuse to make sound decisions. Hand over the keys. We'll make sure you're taken care of." I thought of the keys, the little iron leaf that has warmed my palm for decades, and something inside me settled instead of breaking. I nodded to no one turned and walked through rows of staring people who preferred spectacle to spine. The doors opened on mountain air as cool as a blessing. The night smelled like wet stone and magnolia. Crickets insisted on their small music, unafraid of chandeliers or human cruelty. The parking lot lamps painted my old sedan the color of pewter. I slid into the driver's seat and didn't start the engine. My fingers found my phone in that worn leather purse Melanie called Grandma's satchel, and dialed a number I've always kept memorized the way you memorize the location of the fire extinguisher you pray you'll never need. "Walter," I said when he answered on the second ring. "It's Olivia. I need you at Blue Magnolia Manor. Bring the folder, the whole folder." His voice lost its warmth and snapped into the clean lines of his profession. "Are you certain? Because once we do this, Olivia, there's no turning back." "Yes, 30 minutes, please." I ended the call and leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. Beyond the hedges, the party string lights wobbled like captured fireflies. Laughter flared and died. I watched clouds move across the moon with the patience that has been my oldest friend. The left side of my face pulsed to the rhythm of the quartet's aborted waltz. People think I am small. A retired teacher with soil under her nails and a 10-year-old car. A widow with a tidy pension and a knack for stretching a dollar like pie dough. It is a shape I have worn like a cardigan, comfortable, colorless, forgettable. My late husband Charles and I chose it when we realized that money is a kind of megaphone and a kind of magnet, and we wanted to be neither loud nor hunted. He used to say, "Visible wealth draws lightning. Invisible wealth builds a shelter." After he died, I learned to sit quietly beneath that roof and listen to storms pass. Melanie never much liked quiet. The first time she breezed into my apartment, she stood at the panoramic window and pretended to admire the view of downtown Asheville, shouldering up against the blue humps of the mountains. But her eyes flicked not to the skyline, not to the magnolia I've coaxed to bloom and fail and bloom again, but to the crown molding the hardwood floors, the elevator fob. She inhaled the space the way a developer inhales a parcel, measurements instead of memories. "How cozy," she said, and the word lay on the floor between us, still damp with contempt. I remember watching her that day, this beautiful young woman with ambition like a sharpened blade. She carried herself with the confidence that comes from never having been told no. Her family name Parker opened doors in certain circles, though I later learned those circles were shrinking as the family fortune dwindled. I caught a glimpse of the pressure she carried one afternoon when her mother Patricia called. Melanie didn't know I was home, returning early from the flower shop. I heard her pacing in the guest room. "Mother, I know what you expect," she hissed into her phone. "But Jason isn't on partner track yet. We're managing. No, the wedding budget is non-negotiable. The Parkers do not have modest ceremonies. I don't care what Daddy says about market fluctuations. Find the money somewhere." When she emerged, her smile was fixed back in place. But I saw what lived behind it: hunger, fear, the desperate need to maintain appearances at any cost. In another life, I might have felt compassion, but I was busy watching my son change before my eyes. Jason started using phrases I recognized only from brochures. "Appropriate for your age," he'd say while eyeing my 2-story apartment. "Safety," he'd mention, though I'd never fallen. "Ease of living." Though I still tended my rooftop garden without assistance. Melanie's parents, Gregory and Patricia, arrived one evening with glossy folders and statistics about falls, loneliness, financial exploitation. They tried to make cages smell like lavender. They tried to turn my home into their second chance. When people rehearse a script that makes them feel moral, they begin to speak louder. They forget someone like me has ears and a long, slow memory. I heard Gregory on the phone in my kitchen murmuring about liquidating non-performing assets. I watched Patricia trace my hallway with the tip of a manicured finger and say to Melanie, "2 big closets. This would be perfect for starting out." I said very little. I have had practice at being underestimated. It wasn't always this way with Jason. The boy I raised had a laugh that could fill rooms. He used to stand between me and the world with his shoulders squared, even when those shoulders barely reached my elbow. After Charles died, Jason would call every evening at precisely 7. "Just checking on my best girl," he'd say, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The change happened so gradually, I almost missed it. First, the calls became less frequent. Then they took on an edge of performance, as if he were reading from a script. "How are you feeling today? Any dizziness? Have you taken your pills?" Pills. I didn't need for conditions. I didn't have. I found a business card mistakenly left in my recycling, a guardianship attorney who advertises swift outcomes for concerned families. I said nothing, but I called a friend in real estate for a favor I hated to ask. The numbers she gave me were a lit fuse, Jason and Melanie's rent, 3 months late wedding on credit, 2 cars they couldn't afford, washed weekly, and posted to the internet like trophies. Meanwhile, my son made inquiries about power of attorney and what courts look for when deciding capacity. He didn't choose a predatory daughter-in-law over me. He chose the easy story of a helpless old woman over the complicated truth of his own mother. The magnolias shifted, whispering. I watched my hands still steady, still mine rest on the steering wheel, and thought of the folder Walter would bring. Inside the stitches I'd sewn to keep our complicated truth from unraveling. Records of 3 years of transfers I had made quietly to keep Jason's ship from sinking. Lease guarantees signed without fanfare. A cancellation letter drafted months ago waiting for a date. Medical evaluations stamped by my physician because I know what rumors do when they're fed. An amended will that points away from blood and toward need. The spare key to a version of myself I haven't been in a long time. The woman who can walk into a room and turn on a light, no matter who shouts for darkness. A golf cart rumbled past, the estate manager ferrying a stray bridesmaid to the restrooms. Her toll fluttered like fog. Somewhere a guest laughed too loudly. Somewhere a phone camera stayed open. I pictured Melanie back under those chandeliers, telling anyone who would listen that she'd finally done what good wives do, protect their marriage from the dead weight of a needy mother. I pictured Jason beside her jaw, flexing the way it did when he lied as a child and hated himself for it. It is a strange thing to feel your heart break and harden in the same hour. I pressed my fingers gently to the hot bloom on my cheek. My eyes stung. The first tears I let fall were for the boy I raised. The second were for the woman who had mistaken silence for weakness. The last were not tears at all, but something clearer. Headlights slipped through the hedge, sleek, familiar. Walter parked 3 spaces down and got out with the leather portfolio cradled like a violin. He looked at me through the windshield, measuring what I hadn't said, then came to my door and opened it as if I were stepping into court, or a church, or a battlefield. Last chance to stay small, he said quietly. I took the portfolio. It was heavier than I remembered, the way truth is heavier when you carry it instead of hiding it under your coat. I've been small long enough. Together we walked back toward the ballroom past the manicured magnolias and the little sign that said, "Please no sparklers near the hedges." The violins had started again, a valiant waltz trying to pretend nothing had happened. When we reached the tall doors, Walter paused, and I saw my reflection in the brass hair pinned in the simple twist, Charles' loved eyes, neither young nor old, just awake. The chandeliers burned brighter when I stepped back inside, as though the room itself wanted to see me flayed. Music fluttered to a halt, for the second time that night, the quartet bowing their heads, not out of respect, but out of instinct, animals ducking before a storm. Conversation stuttered, cut short in mid-syllable. The smell of champagne and petits fours thickened in my throat. Walter walked beside me, his leather portfolio under one arm. With his steady gaze and ramrod posture, he carried the gravitas of 4 decades in family law. Tonight, he was my shield against the storm. I let my eyes sweep across the room. Jason finally looked up, his mouth parting as though he wanted to speak, but found no words. Melanie stood at his side, chin tilted, the smudge of victory still on her lips. When she saw Walter, the victory faltered. She knew his type: professional, unshakable, a man who carried paper like weapons. "Mother, what are you doing?" Jason asked, his voice higher than I remembered from childhood. I ignored him. Walter clicked open the portfolio with a sound that cut through the hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said evenly, "I apologize for interrupting, but Mrs. Olivia Washington has authorized me to present some urgent matters of record. It will take only a few moments." A ripple of unease slithered through the guests. They leaned forward, drawn to the scent of scandal. I caught sight of Gregory and Patricia Parker at the head table. They stiffened in unison like puppets sharing one string. Walter's hand moved with practiced precision. "First effective immediately, the financial guarantee provided by Mrs. Washington for her son's lease has been revoked. Notice has been filed. The landlord will expect alternate arrangements within 30 days. Gasps punctured the air. Jason blinked confusion, twisting his features. "Financial guarantee," he murmured. Melanie's fingers curled into his sleeve. "She's bluffing," she whispered, but her knuckles were white. "Second," Walter continued, his tone relentless, "all monthly transfers Mrs. Washington has made into her son's accounts averaging $400 or $500 are permanently suspended. This includes credit card payments, vehicle insurance, and assorted living expenses." The murmurs thickened into whispers. A few guests pulled out phones already recording. Patricia Parker's mouth formed a hard line. Her face paled, then flushed red. "That's impossible," Melanie cried, her voice shrill. "She works in a flower shop now. Look at her car. She's been penniless her whole life." I finally spoke. My voice carried across the ballroom, steadier than I expected. "Appearances deceive, Melanie. Charles and I chose modesty. We learned long ago that wealth attracts vultures. So we lived simply and kept our fortune quiet." I paused, watching the words sink in. "Tonight, you and Jason should be grateful for that silence, because for 3 years, it's the only reason you could play at this life of yours." Jason's face twisted, recognition flickering like lightning in his eyes. He knew deep down the late rent that mysteriously vanished. The credit cards brought current. The vacation, he believed, was financed by a tax refund. He had suspected, but suspicion is easy to bury when it benefits you. "Third," Walter said, his final page crisp, "the guaranteed payment for this very celebration has been rescinded. The ballroom management will require immediate settlement or will suspend services." All at once, the music, the laughter, the shallow bravado collapsed into silence, so sharp it rang. Victor Ruiz, the ballroom manager, stepped forward from the shadows, his face stern. "You heard him," he said to the bride and groom. "Payment must be secured before midnight." Guests exchanged glances. A few began edging toward the doors, unwilling to remain tethered to a sinking ship. Melanie's scream shattered the air. "You bitter old woman, you've ruined everything. You've humiliated us on our wedding day." Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. I met her eyes and spoke so everyone could hear. "No, Melanie, I did not ruin your wedding. You did. The moment you slapped me in front of 100 witnesses, the moment you mistook kindness for weakness." The words rolled through the ballroom like a bell tolling. I could see shoulders stiffen, guests shifting, recording, whispering. They would carry this story out into Asheville by morning. Jason stumbled forward, his voice breaking. "Mom, please stop this. We can talk about it later. You're making a scene." I turned to him. My own son. The boy I once rocked through fevers. The man who now flinched from truth. "Jason, the scene was made the moment you stood silent while your wife raised her hand against me, the moment you allowed her greed to eclipse your honor." He opened his mouth, but nothing came. Walter closed the portfolio with a decisive snap. "One last matter," he said. "Mrs. Washington has amended her will. All assets once designated for her son are now bequeathed to the Mountain Laurel Trust, a fund dedicated to protecting elders from abuse." The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, even laughter from some corners. Gregory Parker dropped his napkin. Patricia's hand trembled against her pearls. Melanie's legs buckled and she sank into a chair, sobbing. "You can't do this. You can't cut us out. We're your family." I stepped closer, my voice cold as riverstone. Family does not conspire to strip an old woman of her home. Family does not humiliate their own in public. Family does not measure love in square footage and bank accounts. If that is your definition of family, then I am grateful to be without it. The chandeliers blazed down, harsh and merciless, illuminating every crack in their perfect facade. For the first time in years, I felt taller. I turned to Walter. "We're done here." And together we walked out, leaving behind a ballroom heavy with shame, shock, and the crumbling empire of two people who thought they could build their kingdom on my silence. The night air outside was cooler than I expected, sharp, with the scent of pine drifting down from the Blue Ridge. My lungs expanded as though they had been shackled for years and only now could take their first full breath. Behind me, chaos churned the scrape of chairs, the rising hum of frantic voices, Melanie's sobs slicing through the ballroom's gilded doors. Walter placed a steady hand on my elbow. "Mrs. Washington," he said quietly, "there is no undoing this. You've severed every lifeline they thought they had." "I know." My voice carried none of the trembling I felt inside. "But they severed me first." From the corner of the lot, a familiar silhouette emerged. Maya Coleman, my neighbor of 2 decades. She was bundled in her shawl, clutching a small purse, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and pride. "Olivia," she whispered, "I saw everything. They tried to bury you alive in there, but you rose up like a flame." I embraced her, realizing my own hands were still shaking. "Maya, you shouldn't have come." "Nonsense," she replied, her grip fierce despite her 75 years. "I've watched you be quiet for too long. Tonight you remembered who you are." Her words lit something inside me, something I hadn't dared to feel in years. Defiance, yes, but also a dangerous kind of freedom. As we stood there, the ballroom doors slammed open. Jason stumbled out, his tie askew, his eyes wild. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, searching for a foothold. "Mom," he gasped, "please don't leave like this. We can talk. I didn't know how far she was pushing you, I thought." His words broke, scattered like glass. I studied him under the harsh glow of the parking lamps. The boy I raised was still somewhere inside, but buried beneath years of weakness and greed. "You thought wrong, Jason. You chose her silence over my dignity, and tonight you both learned what that costs." His lips trembled. He glanced back toward the ballroom where Victor Ruiz's stern voice was booming about overdue payment. Guests streamed out, faces tight with gossip and pity. Jason reached for me, but Walter stepped forward, his presence a wall between us. "This isn't the place," Walter said firmly. Jason's hand fell. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I thought he might crumple right there on the pavement. Then Melanie's shriek echoed from inside. "Jason, get back here! They're demanding the money!" He looked at me one last time, despair etched across his face, before running back to the mess he had chosen. Maya exhaled softly. "You gave him a choice. He walked back into the fire." I nodded, though my throat ached with grief. "I can't save a man who refuses to step out of the flames." Walter opened the car door for me. "Mrs. Washington," he said gently. "There's more we need to discuss. The will, the trust, the media. This will not stay contained in Asheville." "I don't want it contained," I murmured, sliding into the seat. "If my humiliation went public, then so should the truth. Let the whole world know what happens when a woman refuses to be erased." As the car pulled away, I looked once more at the ballroom. The chandeliers still burned, but now they looked less like stars and more like interrogation lights, merciless, exposing, stripping every false layer away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. The following morning, I awoke to a silence so heavy it felt deliberate, as though the world itself was waiting to see what I would do next. My cheek still throbbed faintly from Melanie's slap, the mark hidden beneath a faint bruise. Yet the greater ache was deeper, a mixture of betrayal and something sharper, almost like rebirth. I brewed a pot of chicory coffee, its bitter richness steadying me, and carried it to the balcony that overlooked the French Broad River. From here, Asheville stretched out in pastel tones, mountains soft in the distance, rooftops touched by dawn. This had been my sanctuary, my fortress of modesty, and now the world knew it was also a vault of secrets. The newspaper arrived with a heavy thud. On the front page, nestled between election coverage and a story about wildfire risks, was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable, of me standing in the ballroom with Walter at my side. The caption read, "Woman exposes family scheme at wedding spectacle." I traced the words with my fingertip. So it had begun. My phone vibrated endlessly. Missed calls, messages, unknown numbers. I ignored them until one name appeared that I couldn't. Jason. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, his voice ragged. "They're tearing us apart. Reporters, creditors, everyone's calling. You didn't have to do this." "I had no choice," I replied evenly. "You forced my hand when you stood silent." "You think I wanted that? You think I liked watching her slap you?" His voice cracked. "But I couldn't stop it. Not there. Not with everyone watching. Not there or not ever." My tone was sharper than I intended. "You've been choosing silence for months, Jason. That night was only the crescendo." On the other end, only breathing heavy, ashamed. Finally, "She's pregnant." The words knocked the air from me. Pregnant. A grandchild I hadn't even dreamed of, now tethered to a woman who despised me. "That changes nothing," I said, though my hands trembled on the railing. "If anything, it makes what I did more necessary. That child deserves parents who know the value of truth, not parasites who live off deception." He muttered something too low to catch, then hung up. The dial tone hummed like a dirge. I stood frozen for a long time until a knock startled me. When I opened the door, Maya stood there, a wicker basket of cornbread in her arms. Beside her was a younger woman in a crisp suit, her expression professional but kind. "Olivia," Maya said, bustling in. "This here is my niece Zoe. She's an attorney. She saw the news and insisted on coming." Zoe extended her hand. "Mrs. Washington, forgive the intrusion, but I believe you'll need counsel beyond financial advisement. If your son and his wife are desperate, they may attempt to challenge your competency. I've seen it before." I blinked. Challenge my competency? The idea felt absurd. And yet, hadn't Melanie's family already tried to paint me as fragile, incapable, too old to manage my affairs? Zoe placed a folder on my dining table. "I've started compiling cases similar to yours. Seniors stripped of their homes, bank accounts, drained, reputations smeared. You'd be surprised how many never fight back." I touched the folder as if it were an anchor. "Then maybe it's time they had someone to follow." Maya squeezed my shoulder. "That's what I told her. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore, Olivia. You're fighting for all of us." The thought settled in my chest like an ember catching flame. For the first time since the slap, I realized this story was no longer only mine. By week's end, the fallout had spiraled into a spectacle no one could ignore. The Asheville Gazette ran another feature, "Wedding of the Year becomes Scandal of the Decade." My face stared back at me from every newsstand, alternately painted as villain or hero depending on the writer's leanings. Reporters camped outside my building, their lenses glinting like hungry eyes. I pulled my curtains tighter and poured another cup of coffee, but the walls seemed thinner, their questions seeping through. Did she betray her own son? Was the bride justified? Through it all, Walter remained calm. "Olivia," he said one morning as we reviewed documents at my kitchen table, "the best defense is not silence, it's ownership. If you let them write your story, they'll twist it. You need to tell it yourself." The idea chilled me. A public interview my life, my secrets laid bare before strangers. But then I thought of Melanie's triumphant smirk as she declared me obsolete. I thought of Jason's silence of that unborn child whose first legacy was greed and deceit. I nodded. Then let's find the right place to tell it. Meanwhile, Jason's desperation deepened. He appeared at my door one night, disheveled eyes rimmed red. "Mom, we're being evicted." He confessed, his voice small. "The lease you pulled your guarantee. The landlord's giving us 30 days. "You should have thought of that before conspiring against me," I said quietly. He sank into my armchair, the same one he had curled in as a boy during thunderstorms. "She says I should sue you for elder neglect, that we can prove you're losing your mind." A blade between my ribs. "And do you believe her?" His gaze flickered, shameful, uncertain. "I don't know what I believe anymore." I walked to the mantel, picked up a framed photo of him at 8 years old, grinning with 2 missing teeth. I held it toward him. "Do you see this boy? I raised him on honesty. I raised him to protect, not plunder. If you follow her path, Jason, you bury him forever." He stared at the photo, then set it down as though it burned him. Without another word, he left the echo of the door closing louder than any shout. That night I couldn't sleep. The river outside churned dark and restless, and so did I. Their plan wasn't just greed anymore, it was war. And wars were not won by defense alone. The next morning I called Zoe. "File whatever you must. Conservatorship challenges, defamation suits. Prepare for everything. They've declared battle. I intend to finish it." Zoe's voice was steady, resolute. "Then Mrs. Washington will make sure the battlefield is on your terms." I ended the call and moved to my balcony. The mountains stood silent, unmoved by human drama. The magnolia in my rooftop garden had dropped a blossom overnight. I picked it up, its white petals already browning at the edges, and held it to my nose, still sweet, even in death. Charles would have known exactly what to say. He would have wrapped his long fingers around mine and reminded me that truth was never comfortable, but always necessary. In our 40 years together, he had taught me that kindness was not weakness, but strength held in reserve. I wondered what he would think of his son now, of the grandchild on the way. I wondered if somewhere beyond those mountains he was watching, waiting to see if I remembered who I really was. I pressed the magnolia blossom between the pages of my journal and turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote 3 words: "I am seen." Dum! The ink had barely dried when the war I'd declared at Blue Magnolia Manor began in earnest. 2 days after my confrontation with Jason, I found myself seated beside Walter and Zoe in my dining room. Morning light spilled through the windows, catching dust motes that swirled like tiny planets. The table had become a war room, covered with legal documents, newspaper clippings, and 3 mugs of coffee gone cold. "They've officially filed," Zoe said, sliding a document toward me. Her voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of outrage. "Petition for emergency guardianship on grounds of diminished capacity." I stared at the paper, the words swimming before my eyes. Even though Zoe had warned me this was coming, seeing my name listed as the incapacitated person sent a chill through my body that no amount of sunshine could warm. "They're not wasting any time," Walter remarked, his pen tapping against his legal pad. "Filed less than 48 hours after the wedding incident." "Because they're desperate," Zoe replied. "The landlord's eviction notice arrived yesterday. The credit card companies are freezing their accounts. They need control of Mrs. Washington's assets immediately." I traced my finger over Jason's signature at the bottom of the petition. The loops and curves I'd once praised when he was learning cursive in 3rd grade. The same hand that once made me Mother's Day cards with glitter that got everywhere. Now it was the hand signing papers declaring me incompetent. "Tell me what happens next," I said, folding my hands in my lap to stop them from trembling. Zoe straightened, her professional demeanor taking over. "The court will schedule a hearing within 14 days. They've requested an expedited process citing urgent financial concerns. They've also filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent you from making any financial changes or decisions until after the hearing. Walter snorted. Too late for that. What about the pregnancy? I asked. The words still felt strange in my mouth. A grandchild I might never know. Zoe's expression softened slightly. They've included it in their filing, suggesting that your actions are depriving your future grandchild of financial security. It's an emotional appeal designed to paint you as cold and uncaring. I looked out the window at the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. They had watched generations of human drama play out beneath them and remained unmoved. I wished for their patience. So they want to declare me incompetent, take control of my finances, and likely move me to some facility while they take over my home, I summarized. All within 2 weeks. That's their plan, Walter confirmed, but they're underestimating you. Again. The doorbell rang, startling us all. Maya stood on my threshold, clutching a USB drive like it contained state secrets. You need to see this, she said, bustling past me without waiting for an invitation. Mrs. Hanratty in 3B was at Riverside Cafe yesterday. She recorded something on her phone. We gathered around my laptop as Maya inserted the drive. The video was shaky at first, clearly taken surreptitiously, but the audio was crystal clear. Melanie sat at an outdoor table, her designer sunglasses perched on top of her head. Across from her was a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, expensive suit, the confident posture of someone used to getting his way. The psychiatric evaluation is scheduled for Monday, the man was saying, his voice low but distinct. Dr. Levinson owes me a favor. He'll provide the assessment we need. Melanie leaned forward. And that will be enough. She seemed so together at the wedding. People saw. The man waved dismissively. Momentary lucidity is common in dementia patients. We'll establish a pattern of confusion, poor decision-making paranoia. The financial transfers to Jason will be presented as manipulation on his part, taking advantage of her condition. But there are records going back 3 years, Melanie objected, which supports our case. Progressive decline. The outburst at the wedding was the final break, public humiliation of family members, irrational accusations, emotional volatility. He smiled all teeth and no warmth. Trust me, Melanie. I've handled dozens of these cases. Once we have guardianship, the property transfers will be simple. We can have her placed in Pinewood Meadows. It's basic, but adequate. Medicaid will cover most costs. And the apartment the investments. As her guardian, Jason will have full discretion. For the good of his mother, of course. The man reached across and patted Melanie's hand. And for your growing family. The video ended. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic below. That's Eric Collins, Zoe said finally. Guardianship attorney. Has quite a reputation for helping families manage difficult elders. She nearly spat the words. He's the one whose card I found in my recycling, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Mrs. Hanratty says they met for almost an hour, Maya added. She recorded as much as she could before her phone battery died. Walter was already on his phone, typing furiously. I'm checking on this Dr. Levinson. If he's providing fraudulent evaluations, that's reportable to the medical board. I sat very still, absorbing the implications. They weren't just trying to take my home and money. They were trying to erase me to write a new story where I was confused, irrational, declining, where my life's choices were symptoms instead of decisions, where I ceased to exist as a person with agency and became merely a problem to be managed. They want to put me away, I said, the words hanging in the air like smoke, like an outdated appliance. Store me somewhere cheap and forgotten. Not if I have anything to say about it, Zoe declared, her jaw set in determination. This video is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. We can file a counter-petition and request sanctions. But beneath my shock, something else was growing, a slow-burning fury I hadn't felt in decades. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my very existence, my right to be seen as a whole person. We need more than just defense, I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. We need to take this fight to them. Walter looked up from his phone, one eyebrow raised. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to file charges, elder abuse, conspiracy, fraud, everything applicable, and I want to go public with my story." Maya grinned, reaching for my hand. "Now that's the Olivia Washington I've known all these years." Walter and Zoe exchanged glances. "It will get ugly," Walter cautioned. "They'll drag your name through the mud, question every decision you've ever made." "They already think I'm mud," I replied. "At least this way I get to choose the battlefield." The next morning, a small notice appeared in the Asheville Gazette announcing an informal community meeting at the Highland Library. Topic: Elder Rights and Financial Abuse, One Woman's Story. I'd expected perhaps a dozen curious attendees. Instead, I walked into a room filled with nearly 50 people. Mostly women, mostly over 60, but also younger faces, social workers, legal aides, even a few journalists. Maya had arranged chairs in a semicircle and placed a small podium at the front. "What is all this?" I whispered, clutching my prepared notes. "Word travels," she replied with a wink. "Turns out you're not the only one with a story to tell." As I made my way to the front, I noticed the faces, some curious, some wary, but many bearing the unmistakable look of recognition. These were people who had lived their own versions of my story, who had felt themselves being slowly erased. I cleared my throat. "Thank you all for coming. My name is Olivia Washington. A week ago, I was publicly slapped by my daughter-in-law at her wedding because I refused to surrender the keys to my home. That moment was the culmination of months of manipulation, gaslighting, and attempts to strip me of my dignity." The room was utterly silent. I could hear the building's old heating system clicking in the walls. But my story isn't unique, and that's why I'm here today. For the next hour, I laid it all bare, the subtle shifts in Jason's behavior, the comments about my age, the concerned discussions about my living situation. I described finding the guardianship attorney's card, discovering the financial struggles they had hidden, realizing they were laying groundwork to declare me incompetent. When I finished, I expected questions. Instead, a woman in the back row slowly stood. She must have been close to 80. Her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her posture still straight and proud. "My daughter and son-in-law did the same," she said, her voice quavering slightly. "Except, I didn't fight back. I believed them when they said I couldn't manage alone anymore. I signed over my house. Now I live in a single room at Golden Sunset Care Home while they vacation in my home." She paused, blinking rapidly. "I wish I'd had your courage." Another woman rose. "My nephew emptied my bank accounts. When I confronted him, he told everyone I was confused about my finances. My own sister believed him." One by one, they stood and spoke stories of homes lost, of bank accounts, drained, of being moved to facilities against their will, of having their concerns dismissed as confusion or ingratitude, of families who measured love in square footage and dollar signs. Zoe stood and addressed the group. "What's happening here is a pattern, not isolated incidents. There are laws against elder abuse and financial exploitation, but they're under-enforced. Courts often side with adult children over elderly parents, particularly when those parents are women and people of color." A reporter from the local public radio station raised her hand. "Mrs. Washington, you mentioned your son has filed for guardianship. What happens next?" "A hearing is scheduled for next week," I answered. "They will try to prove I'm incompetent to manage my affairs. I intend to prove otherwise. And if you win," I hadn't considered the question, "what would winning look like in a battle against my only child? If I win, I maintain my independence and my dignity. But more importantly, perhaps others will find the courage to fight too." The meeting continued for another hour, with Zoe explaining legal resources and Maya organizing contact information for a support network. As people filed out, many stopped to squeeze my hand or whisper thanks. The reporter approached as I was gathering my notes. "Mrs. Washington, would you consider sharing your story more widely? I think it could help a lot of people." I thought of Walter's words. "If you let them write your story, they'll twist it." "Yes," I said. "I think it's time." The interview aired the following day. By evening, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages poured in from other elders facing similar battles, from advocates, from strangers offering support. Walter called to say 3 more attorneys had volunteered to join our legal team pro bono. "You've struck a nerve," he said. "This is becoming bigger than just your case." I should have felt empowered. Instead, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. I hadn't slept properly since the wedding. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's face, not as the man who betrayed me, but as the little boy who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms. The doorbell rang just after 9. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment fear flickered through me. What if it was Melanie or Eric Collins or some other threat? I peered through the peephole and my heart stalled. Jason stood in the hallway alone, shoulders slumped, hands thrust deep in his pockets. For a long moment I considered not answering. Zoe had advised against any contact without her present. But something in his posture, the defeat written in every line of his body, made my hand turn the lock. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping the door half closed between us. He looked up, and I was struck by how much he'd aged in just a week. His eyes were rimmed with red, his cheeks hollow. "I heard your interview," he said, his voice rough. "You told everyone." I told the truth. He nodded, accepting this. "Can I come in, just to talk? No lawyers, no Melanie, just us." Every instinct screamed caution, but this was Jason, my son, my only child. I stepped back, allowing him to enter. He walked to the living room windows, staring out at the city lights. It was a view he'd grown up with, the backdrop to countless homework sessions and family dinners. "They're going to foreclose on the condo," he said finally. "We missed too many payments, and now the bank knows about the wedding fiasco. They're accelerating the loan." I said nothing. His financial problems were no longer my responsibility. Melanie's parents cut her off too, said they couldn't keep bailing us out. He laughed, a hollow sound. "Turns out they're as broke as we are, all smoke and mirrors." "Why are you here, Jason?" I asked. "To make me feel guilty, to ask for more money." He turned, and in the dim light I could see tears tracking down his face. "I'm here because I don't know who I am anymore," he whispered. "When did I become this person? When did I start believing that taking from you was justified, that treating you like you're incompetent was okay?" He swiped roughly at his eyes. "I keep thinking about Dad. What would he say if he could see me now?" The mention of Charles pierced me. "He would be heartbroken," I said honestly. Jason nodded, accepting this truth like a physical blow. "I knew about the money," he confessed. "The transfers each month. I told myself it was your way of helping, that you wanted to do it. But really, I was just too ashamed to acknowledge how badly I'd failed." He moved to the mantel, picking up the photograph I'd shown him days before 8-year-old Jason, with his gap-toothed smile. "I keep thinking about what you said, about burying this boy." His fingers trembled against the glass. "I think I started burying him long before Melanie came along." Something in my chest ached, a mother's instinct to comfort warring with the rational knowledge that this man had tried to have me declared incompetent. "The guardianship petition," I said. "The conspiracy with Eric Collins, the plan to put me in Pinewood Meadows. Was that all Melanie's idea?" His head snapped up. "What are you talking about? What plan? Either he was an excellent actor, or he genuinely didn't know." I crossed to my laptop and played Maya's video. As Melanie's voice filled the room, Jason's face drained of color. He sank onto the sofa, his body seeming to collapse in on itself as he listened to his wife and Eric Collins plotting my institutionalization. When it ended, he sat in stunned silence. "I didn't know," he finally whispered. "I swear to you, Mom, I didn't know about Pinewood or Dr. Levinson. She told me the guardianship was just to protect you from financial predators, that you'd still live here, that I'd just help manage the complicated stuff." His voice broke. "Oh God, what have I done?" The raw anguish in his voice reached something primal in me, the mother who had held this man when he was small enough to fit in my arms. For a moment I wanted nothing more than to cross the room and comfort him as I had done 1,000 times before. But this wasn't a skinned knee or a bad dream. This was betrayal on a scale I couldn't simply kiss away. "Did you know she's not really pregnant?" I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Jason looked up, confusion clouding his features. "What? Of course she is. She showed me the test. We've been trying for months." I considered telling him about Melanie's conversation with Eric. No mention of pregnancy, detailed plans for my institutionalization that Jason supposedly knew nothing about. But the devastation on his face stopped me. There was only so much a person could process at once. "The hearing is in 4 days," I said instead. "I won't withdraw my counterpetition. I won't drop the charges." "I know." He set the photograph back on the mantel with careful precision. "I wouldn't expect you to." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for the guardianship thing. For everything. For standing there while she hit you. For forgetting who you are. For forgetting who I'm supposed to be." The words hung between us, insufficient, yet necessary. "It's worth something," I acknowledged, "but not everything." After he left, I sat in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of my home, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock Charles had restored decades ago, the distant rumble of traffic 16 floors below. Tomorrow there would be more meetings with lawyers, more preparations for battle. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve for what was broken beyond repair. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. I dressed with deliberate care, a navy suit I'd worn to faculty meetings during my teaching days, a strand of pearls Charles had given me on our 30th anniversary, sensible shoes that wouldn't betray any hint of unsteadiness. I applied makeup to cover the last faint traces of Melanie's slap, now yellowed to a ghost of its former self. Maya arrived at 8, bearing a thermos of strong coffee and stronger determination. Zoe and Walter met us in the lobby, flanked by 2 additional attorneys who had joined our cause. Together, we walked the 6 blocks to the county courthouse, a procession that grew as supporters from the Highland Library meeting joined along the way. By the time we reached the courthouse steps, we were nearly 30 strong, most of them women with silver hair and steel in their spines. Reporters clustered at the entrance, cameras flashing. "Remember," Walter murmured as we approached, "they'll try to provoke an emotional response. Stay calm, speak clearly, and look directly at Judge Ellery when you answer questions." Inside the courtroom was already crowded. I spotted Jason immediately sitting beside Eric Collins at the petitioner's table. Melanie sat directly behind them, her face a careful mask of concern. She'd dressed the part of the devoted daughter-in-law, her typically flashy style muted to conservative beige. I searched for any sign of a pregnancy, but saw none. Her tailored skirt suit revealed the same slim figure as always. Perhaps it was still too early to show, or perhaps it was another manipulation. Judge Ellery entered a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She surveyed the packed courtroom with a raised eyebrow. "Quite the turnout for a guardianship hearing," she remarked. "Let's proceed." Eric Collins rose first, his voice oozing concern. "Your Honor, we're here today seeking emergency guardianship for Olivia Washington, who has demonstrated increasingly erratic behavior and financial decisions inconsistent with her best interests. Her actions at her son's wedding, publicly humiliating the couple, and making irrational financial declarations represent the culmination of a pattern of decline." He presented affidavits from wedding guests describing my outburst. He introduced a psychiatrist, Dr. Levinson, I presumed, who spoke of common patterns of cognitive decline without having ever met me. He displayed bank records of my transfers to Jason as evidence of my being taken advantage of. Throughout his presentation, I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I noticed Judge Ellery watching me as often as she watched Collins. When it was our turn, Zoe stood with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, what you've heard is not a case for guardianship, but a calculated attempt at financial exploitation." She placed a copy of Maya's video recording on the evidence table. "We have documented evidence of the petitioner's wife conspiring with counsel to obtain fraudulent medical evaluations and place Mrs. Washington in a substandard care facility against her will solely to gain control of her assets." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Ellery's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious allegation, Counselor." "Yes, it is, Your Honor, and we can prove it." The video played on the courtroom monitor. I watched Melanie's face drain of color as her own voice filled the room. Jason's shoulders stiffened with each damning word. When it ended, Eric Collins was on his feet objecting to the recording's admissibility, claiming it was obtained without consent. Judge Ellery held up a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Collins, I suggest you consider your position very carefully. If this recording is authenticated, you may be facing ethics charges before the bar." She turned toward me. "Mrs. Washington, do you wish to speak on your own behalf?" I rose steadily, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The walk to the witness stand felt like crossing an ocean. After being sworn in, I faced the crowded courtroom. I saw Maya's encouraging nod, the supportive gazes of strangers who had become allies, the hostile glare of Melanie, and Jason, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "Mrs. Washington," Judge Ellery said, "in your own words, please tell the court why you believe this guardianship petition should be denied." I took a deep breath. The time for silence had long passed. "Your Honor, I am 72 years old. I have taught third grade for 35 years. I have buried a husband, raised a son, and managed my finances well enough to secure a comfortable retirement. Age has changed my body, but not my mind." I looked directly at Jason as I continued. "What you've witnessed here is not the confusion of old age. It is the clarity of betrayal." I explained the gradual campaign to undermine my confidence, the concerned conversations about my living situation, the discovery of the guardianship attorney's card. "I didn't make those financial transfers because I was confused. I made them because I'm a mother who couldn't bear to see her son struggle, even when that struggle was self-inflicted. Perhaps that was foolish, but it wasn't incompetence." Judge Ellery studied me over her reading glasses. "And the incident at the wedding, Mr. Collins suggests it demonstrates emotional volatility and impaired judgment." "The incident at the wedding, Your Honor, was a woman finally saying, 'Enough.' My daughter-in-law slapped me in front of 130 guests because I wouldn't surrender my home to her. My son stood silent while it happened." My voice remained steady, though my heart raced. If standing up for myself after that humiliation demonstrates impaired judgment, then I would suggest our standards for elder behavior need reconsideration. A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Ellery's mouth twitched slightly. "Mrs. Washington, do you understand that your son claims to be acting out of concern for your welfare?" I met Jason's gaze across the courtroom. "I understand that people can justify almost anything if they try hard enough." "And do you feel you need any assistance with managing your affairs?" "No more than anyone else, Your Honor. I have a financial advisor, a lawyer, and friends who check on me regularly. I've arranged for automatic payments of my utilities. I keep a calendar and set reminders on my phone. I take reasonable precautions, just as any prudent person would." Judge Ellery nodded, jotting notes. "Thank you, Mrs. Washington. You may step down." I returned to my seat, legs trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Walter squeezed my hand briefly. After a short recess, Judge Ellery returned with her decision. "Having reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today, I find the petition for guardianship of Olivia Washington to be without merit, Mrs. Washington has demonstrated clear cognitive capacity and sound decision-making ability." She removed her glasses, her gaze sharp as she continued. "Furthermore, I am deeply troubled by the evidence suggesting this petition was filed as part of a scheme to gain control of Mrs. Washington's assets through fraudulent means." She addressed Eric Collins directly. "Counsel, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential elder abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and ethics violations. I suggest you retain representation of your own." Melanie made a choked sound. Jason sat motionless, his face ashen. "This case is dismissed. Court adjourned." The gavel fell with a decisive crack. The courtroom erupted, my supporters embracing reporters rushing for the doors, Melanie fleeing in tears with her parents close behind. Through it all, Jason remained seated, staring at nothing. Walter helped me gather my things as the crowd thinned. "A complete victory," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "And with the DA investigating, there may be criminal charges." I nodded, but found no joy in the thought. Victory tasted more bitter than I had expected. As we prepared to leave, I noticed Jason still hadn't moved. Eric Collins had abandoned him already, deep in heated conversation with another attorney in the hallway. "Go ahead," I told Walter. "I'll meet you outside." I approached my son slowly, uncertain what I would say. Up close, he looked utterly defeated, a man watching his life crumble in real time. "Jason," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes hollow. "Congratulations, you won." This wasn't a game with winners and losers. Wasn't it? A humorless laugh escaped him. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've lost everything. My wife's hysterical. Her parents are threatening to sue me. My lawyer's facing disbarment. And my mother just proved to the world what a terrible son I am." "You did that yourself," I reminded him, though, without venom. He nodded, accepting this. "I know." He stood, gathering his coat. "For what it's worth, I'm withdrawing from the case. No appeals, no further legal action. You've won your freedom from me." As he turned to leave, I caught his arm. "Jason, the baby." Something flashed across his face. Pain, anger, resignation. "There is no baby. Never was. Just another lie I was too desperate to question." The confirmation struck me like a physical blow. Even in my darkest suspicions, part of me had hoped for a grandchild, some continuation of love beyond this wreckage. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. He shrugged, the gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that my heart ached. "Yeah, me too." I watched him walk away, shoulders bowed under the weight of consequences too heavy to ignore. Not the boy I raised, but not quite the man who had betrayed me either. Something in between, broken, flawed, but perhaps not beyond redemption. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in golden light. My supporters had gathered along with reporters eager for comments. Maya stood at the center, already recounting the judge's decision to latecomers. Zoe was speaking with a television crew, her words clear and passionate about elder rights. Walter appeared at my side. "Ready for your moment in the spotlight." I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of women who had found their voice in my story, at journalists who would carry that story beyond Asheville, at the ripples of change already spreading from this single act of standing firm. "Yes," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I think I am." As I descended the courthouse steps, a reporter called out, "Mrs. Washington, what would you say to other seniors facing similar situations?" I paused, considering the question. The answer came from somewhere deep inside, from the woman I had always been beneath the cardigan of compliance. I would say that age may change our bodies, but it need not diminish our worth. I would say that silence in the face of injustice serves no one. And I would say that it is never, never too late to reclaim your voice. Cameras flashed. Recorders captured my words. And for the first time since that slap had sent my glasses skittering across the ballroom floor, I felt not just seen, but truly heard. The weeks following the courtroom victory passed in a blur of activity. My quiet life as a retired teacher transformed into something I never could have imagined. The local news coverage of my case spread beyond Asheville, picked up by national outlets always hungry for stories of David versus Goliath. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, messages of support, and heartbreaking accounts from others facing similar battles. "You've become a reluctant icon," Walter observed one morning as we sorted through the day's correspondence at my dining table. I looked up from a letter sent by an 85-year-old woman in Ohio whose children had sold her home while she was recovering from surgery. Her handwriting was shaky, but determined, each word pressed deeply into the paper as if to ensure it wouldn't be overlooked. "Not reluctant," I corrected him. "Just unexpected." Walter smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Charles would be proud, you know. He always said you were the strongest person he knew." The mention of my late husband sent a familiar ache through my chest. He was biased. He was right. I returned to the letter, tracing the woman's signature with my fingertip. Margaret Jenkins, Columbus, Ohio. Another name on a growing list of elders who had reached out, each one carrying a story of dignity, denied of autonomy, threatened of the painful revelation that family ties could become restraints. 2 months after the hearing, Zoe suggested we formalize what had organically begun. The Highland Library meetings had outgrown their space, with sometimes 100 people crowding in to share experiences and resources. My dining room had become a makeshift office where Maya and I answered letters and coordinated support efforts. "It's time to establish a proper foundation," Zoe said. "The Washington Dignity and Justice Fund. We can apply for nonprofit status, accept donations, provide legal assistance to those who can't afford it." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. "I'm not a lawyer or a social worker. I'm just a woman who refused to be silenced." "Sometimes that's enough to start a movement," Zoe replied. The French Broad River glinted in the afternoon sun as I considered her proposal. From my balcony, Asheville looked peaceful, unchanged by the storm that had swept through my life. But I was changed. The woman who had crouched to pick up broken glasses at Blue Magnolia Manor would never have imagined herself at the center of a budding advocacy movement. "All right," I said finally. "Let's do it. But I don't want my name in the title. This isn't about me." We compromised on The Dignity Project, with the tagline, "Because every voice matters." Within weeks, we had secured a small storefront downtown, furnished it with donated office equipment, and assembled a board of directors that included Walter, Zoe, Maya, and 3 other community members who had experienced elder abuse. The work consumed me, filling the void left by Jason's absence. I hadn't spoken to him since the courthouse, though I occasionally saw his name in the local paper. He'd left the marketing firm and taken a teaching position at the community college. Melanie had returned to Atlanta after filing for divorce. The district attorney was still investigating Eric Collins and Dr. Levinson for conspiracy and fraud. I told myself I didn't miss Jason, that the separation was necessary healing. But some nights I would wake from dreams where he was still small enough to carry his head heavy on my shoulder, his breath warm against my neck. On those nights I would sit on my balcony until dawn, watching the city lights blink like earthbound stars, wondering if somewhere in those lights my son was also awake, also remembering. 6 months after the founding of the Dignity Project, we held our first major fundraiser. The event took place at Riverside Gallery, a converted textile mill with soaring ceilings and walls of windows overlooking the water. Local businesses had donated food and wine. A string quartet played in the corner. Nearly 200 people filled the space, many of them survivors of elder abuse who had found community through our work. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests alongside Walter and Zoe. My navy dress felt slightly too formal, but Walter had insisted on making a statement. My hair, more silver than black now, was twisted into an elegant knot that Maya had helped style. "Mrs. Washington." I turned to find a young woman in her 20s clutching a leather portfolio. She had Walter's eyes and Charles's way of standing slightly forward on her toes, as if eager to meet whatever came next. "I'm Lucy Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand. "Walter's daughter. I've been wanting to meet you." "Lucy." I embraced her, surprising us both. "Your father talks about you constantly, the brilliant law student." She blushed. "Not quite brilliant, but determined, and inspired by your case. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you." We found a quiet corner away from the crowd. Lucy opened her portfolio, revealing pages of notes and charts. "I've been researching elder abuse cases nationwide for my thesis," she explained. "What happened to you isn't unusual. In fact, it follows a disturbingly predictable pattern, especially for women of color." She showed me her findings, statistics on guardianship abuse, financial exploitation, the disproportionate impact on minorities and women. The system is designed to favor adult children over elderly parents, particularly when those parents are seen as difficult or uncooperative. "By which they mean refuses to be controlled," I added. "Exactly." Lucy's eyes lit up so like Walter's when he was making a crucial point in court. "But what makes your case special is that you fought back publicly. Most victims suffer in silence, either from shame or lack of resources." She turned to a new page in her notes. "I've been tracking the impact of your story. Since your case made the news, guardianship filings in 3 surrounding counties have dropped by nearly 30%. Legal aid clinics report increased calls from seniors seeking preventive measures like power of attorney documents and advance directives." The statistics blurred before my eyes. I hadn't considered the ripple effects beyond the people who directly contacted us. "What you're doing with the Dignity Project matters," Lucy continued earnestly, "but I think it could be even bigger. With the right approach, you could influence policy at the state level, maybe even nationally." We spent the next hour discussing possibilities, legislative advocacy, educational campaigns, partnerships with other organizations. By the time we rejoined the party, my mind was racing with new ideas and possibilities. The event was deemed a tremendous success, raising enough funds to hire a part-time legal coordinator and expand our services. As the last guest departed, I found myself alone in the gallery, surrounded by the remnants of celebration, empty wine glasses, abandoned programs, flower arrangements beginning to droop. I wandered to the windows, gazing out at the river. Its dark surface reflected the city lights, creating the illusion of a second Asheville flowing beneath the first. Two realities equally valid, separated only by perspective. A sound behind me, footsteps hesitant. I turned, expecting to see Walter or the gallery manager. Instead, Jason stood in the doorway, a bouquet of magnolias in his hands. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked different, thinner, with a beard he hadn't worn before. His clothes were simpler than the designer suits Melanie had insisted upon, but they suited him better. "I saw the article about tonight's event in the Gazette," he said finally. "I'm not sure what I wanted. To see you, I guess." I nodded, not trusting my voice. He crossed the room slowly, as if expecting me to send him away. "These are for you, from my garden. I've started growing things. Turns out I might have inherited your green thumb after all." I accepted the flowers, their fragrance releasing memories of mornings on my rooftop garden, Jason as a child, helping me plant bulbs, his small hands patting soil with solemn concentration. "Thank you," I managed. "They're beautiful." He gestured to the event space. "All of this, it's amazing. What you've created." "It wasn't just me. Many people helped make it happen. But it started with you, with your courage." He paused, his gaze steady for the first time. "I've been following your work, reading about the people you've helped." The magnolias trembled slightly in my hands. I set them on a nearby table before they could betray my emotion. "How are you, Jason?" A simple question, but it seemed to catch him off guard. He blinked rapidly, looking away toward the river. "I'm better, I think. Teaching has been good for me, working with students who actually want to learn, not just clients who want to consume." He offered a small smile. "My apartment is tiny, but it's mine. Paid for with my salary, not credit cards or your money." "And Melanie?" His expression tightened briefly. "The divorce was finalized last month. She's back with her parents in Atlanta. Last I heard, she's dating a real estate developer." I nodded, unsurprised. Melanie had always been drawn to the appearance of success. "I'm sorry things ended that way," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I had never wished for my son's heart to break. "I'm not anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it ached. It took losing everything to realize what I'd become, who I'd allowed myself to become. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said finally. "I wouldn't in your position, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to make amends in whatever ways I can." "Amends," he nodded. "I've been volunteering at Riverside Senior Center, teaching a computer literacy class, and I've been speaking to Zoe's law students about my role in what happened to you, as a case study in elder abuse from the perpetrator's perspective." The thought of Jason speaking publicly about his actions, laying bare his mistakes, his shame struck me deeply. It was not the easy path of avoidance I had expected him to take. "That must be difficult," I said softly. "It is, but necessary." He met my gaze directly. "You taught me that long before any of this happened. That owning our mistakes is the only way to move beyond them." Outside, the wind picked up, sending ripples across the river's surface. The reflected lights shimmered and distorted, then slowly reformed. "I should go," Jason said. "I just wanted to congratulate you on tonight. And to see you one time before." "Before what?" He shrugged, the gesture both casual and final. before accepting that some bridges can't be rebuilt. He turned to leave his steps echoing in the empty gallery. Something inside me cracked open, not the hard shell of anger I had cultivated, but something deeper and more essential. The love that had existed before betrayal that perhaps existed still beneath the layers of hurt. "Jason." He paused, not turning. "The project is hosting a workshop next month. Healing family fractures after financial abuse. We need speakers from all perspectives." Now he did turn hope and disbelief warring on his face. "You'd want me there." "I think your story might help others understand, both victims and those who—" I searched for the right word. "Those who failed them," he finished quietly. I nodded. "Yes. I'll be there," he promised. "Whatever you need me to say, I'll say it. The truth will be enough." After he left, I remained by the window watching the river flow beneath the city lights. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a destination, but a direction, a path chosen daily, with every step either moving toward or away from the possibility of reconciliation. 1 year to the day after Melanie's slap had sent my glasses skittering across the ballroom floor, I stood at a podium in the Asheville Civic Center, facing an audience of nearly 500 people. The event, Elder Rights and Dignity, a Community Conversation, had drawn attendees from across the Southeast, including legislators, advocacy groups, and media. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted the microphone. Public speaking had never been my strength, even during my teaching years. But the Dignity Project had pushed me far beyond my comfort zone in countless ways. 1 year ago today, I began my voice steadier than I felt. I experienced what too many elders face in silence, the humiliation of being treated as less than fully human because of my age. My daughter-in-law slapped me at her wedding reception and demanded the keys to my home. My son stood silent as it happened. The audience was utterly still, hanging on each word. That public moment of shame became a turning point, not just for me, but for hundreds of others who recognized their own struggles in my story. What began as one woman's refusal to be erased has grown into a movement for dignity and justice. I detailed the work of the past year, legal assistance provided to over 200 senior support groups established in 12 communities, educational workshops for families and professionals, advocacy that had already resulted in 2 county-level policy changes regarding guardianship proceedings. But numbers tell only part of the story, I continued. The true measure of our impact lies in the restored dignity of each individual who finds their voice, who stands firm in their right to autonomy and respect. I introduced several speakers, a retired judge who spoke about necessary reforms in guardianship law, a geriatric social worker who addressed the psychological impact of financial exploitation, Lucy Rodriguez presenting her research on racial and gender disparities in elder abuse cases. Then came the moment I both anticipated and dreaded. Our next speaker offers a perspective we rarely hear in these discussions, I said. The journey of someone who participated in elder abuse, who has faced the consequences of those actions, and who now works to make amends. My son, Jason Washington. A murmur rippled through the audience as Jason approached the podium. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis. His beard neatly trimmed, his eyes clear but nervous. I stepped aside, giving him the space that had defined our relationship for the past year, close enough to see each other clearly, but with boundaries firmly maintained. "Thank you," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I stand before you today not as a victim or an advocate, but as someone who betrayed the most fundamental trust that between a son and his mother." He spoke without notes, his words clearly long rehearsed in the privacy of his conscience. He described how financial insecurity and a desperate desire to maintain appearances had led him to rationalize increasingly unethical behavior, how he had convinced himself that controlling his mother's assets was for her own protection, how he had stood silent in the face of abuse because confronting it meant confronting his own complicity. "I lost everything," he said. "My marriage, my career, my self-respect. Most painfully, I lost my relationship with my mother, a wound entirely of my own making." He looked at me briefly, then back to the audience. but my losses are nothing compared to what I nearly took from her: her home, her independence, her dignity as a fully capable human being. The silence in the room was complete, heavy with collective recognition. How many in that audience saw reflections of their own family dynamics, their own unspoken justifications? "If there's one thing I've learned," Jason continued, "it's that age is not an invitation to control. Concern is not an excuse for dominance, and love, real love, manifests as respect, not restriction." When he finished, the applause was subdued but genuine, not celebration, but acknowledgement of a difficult truth spoken aloud. The symposium continued into the afternoon with panel discussions and workshops. By the time it concluded, we had gathered commitments from 2 state legislators to introduce stronger elder protection laws in the next session. As the crowd dispersed, I found myself surrounded by the inner circle of the Dignity Project: Walter, Maya, Zoe, Lucy, and several others who had become like family over the past year. We gathered in a small reception room behind the main hall, sharing a moment of quiet celebration. "I think we can call this a success," Walter said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. "More than success," Zoe added. "This is momentum, the kind that leads to real change." Maya squeezed my hand. "And it all started with you refusing to hand over those keys." I smiled, though my thoughts were elsewhere. Through the open door, I could see Jason standing alone in the emptying auditorium, hands in his pockets, seemingly lost in thought. "Excuse me for a moment," I said. He didn't hear me approach, startling slightly when I spoke his name. "Your speech," I said. "It couldn't have been easy." He shook his head. "Not easy, but necessary." He hesitated, then added, "I meant every word." "I know." We stood side by side, looking out over the rows of empty chairs. The distance between us felt both vast and diminished. "I've been thinking about Charles lately," I said, "about what he would make of all this." Jason smiled faintly. "He'd say you finally stopped letting people take advantage of your kindness." "Perhaps." I considered the man beside me, no longer the boy I raised, not quite the stranger he had become during those dark months, but someone new, emerging from the wreckage of our shared pain. He'd also say that strength includes the capacity for mercy. Jason's breath caught audibly. He didn't look at me, as if afraid to break the fragile moment. "I've been invited to speak at a conference in Charlotte next month," I continued, "about the Dignity Project's work. They've asked me to bring someone who can discuss our educational initiatives." Now he did turn hope and uncertainty mingled in his expression. "Are you asking if you're interested? No pressure either way." "I'd be honored," he said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully. It wasn't a return to what had been. But it was a step along the path, an acknowledgement that healing might be possible, even here, even after everything. 2 years passed, marked by steady growth, both for the Dignity Project and for my cautiously rebuilding relationship with Jason. Our work expanded beyond Asheville, establishing chapters in 3 neighboring states. We consulted on legislation, created educational materials for seniors and families, and provided direct support to hundreds of elders facing exploitation. Jason remained involved first as a volunteer speaker, then gradually taking on more responsibility with our educational programs. Our professional interactions slowly gave way to occasional personal ones, a coffee, after a workshop lunch before a board meeting. Small steps carefully taken. On a warm spring morning, I stood in the small courtyard behind our office building, tending to the garden we had planted as a place of respite for those who came seeking help. Magnolias, roses, herbs, life asserting itself in orderly beds and climbing trellises. "It's looking beautiful," Maya said, joining me with 2 mugs of tea. At 77, she moved more slowly now, but remained the Dignity Project's heart, the first voice most callers heard when they reached out in crisis. "The magnolias are Charles's favorites," I replied, then corrected myself. "Were his favorites." Maya settled onto a bench, patting the space beside her. "Grief doesn't follow a calendar, Olivia, even after all these years." I sat accepting the tea with soil-stained hands. It's not grief exactly, more like conversation that continues in his absence. I still find myself thinking, Charles would love this, Or Charles would know how to handle that. That's love outlasting death, Maya said simply. The best kind of haunting. We sat in comfortable silence sipping tea as the morning light strengthened. Birds called from the maple tree that shaded one corner of the garden, a pair of cardinals establishing their territory with melodic insistence. "Have you given any more thought to the expansion proposal?" Maya asked eventually. "Walter's quite excited about the possibility of a dedicated legal clinic." I nodded. "It makes sense as the next step. We're referring so many cases now, it would be more efficient to have our own attorneys on staff. But," I smiled at her perception, "but it means more fundraising, more administration, less time in the garden, less time working directly with the people who come to us." "Growth always requires letting go of something," she observed. Before I could respond, the garden gate opened. Jason appeared carrying a cardboard box that he set carefully on the ground before approaching. "Morning," he greeted us. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's something I wanted to show you both." From the box, he lifted a stone plaque about 18 inches square. Carved into its surface were the words, "The Dignity Garden, dedicated to those who refuse to be diminished, established 2023. Below the text was a simple image of a magnolia blossom. "For the entrance," he explained. "I thought, well, the garden deserves a proper name, something that connects it to the work we do." I touched the carved letters, feeling the depth of the inscription beneath my fingertips. "It's perfect. Thank you." Maya excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving us alone among the spring blooms. Jason set the plaque against the bench and looked around the garden with appreciation. "Remember that tiny patch behind our house on Maple Street?" he asked. "The one you called a garden even though it was barely bigger than a postage stamp. 6 tomato plants, basil, and your sunflowers," I recalled. "Those sunflowers grew taller than you were. I thought they were magic, the way they turned to follow the sun." The memory hung between us, sweet and uncomplicated, a glimpse of the relationship we had once had, might have again in some new form. "I have something else to show you," Jason said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew an envelope and handed it to me. I wasn't sure when the right time would be, but today feels right. Inside was a check, a substantial one, made out to the Dignity Project. "Jason, this is too much. You can't afford—" "I can," he interrupted gently. "I've been saving, teaching extra classes, living simply. It's important to me that I contribute meaningfully, not just with time, but with resources." I understood then what this was: not charity, not obligation, but restitution freely given. Another step in his journey of amends. "The board will be grateful," I said. "This will help fund the legal clinic Walter's been advocating for." "Good. That's good." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, a personal matter." I waited, sensing his nervousness. "I've met someone," he said finally. "Her name is Diane. She teaches literature at the college. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months." "That's wonderful, Jason." And it was the thought of him finding companionship after the disaster with Melanie. "She'd like to meet you," he continued, "if you're comfortable with that. No pressure, of course. I understand if it's too much." The request caught me off guard. This wasn't a professional colleague he was introducing, but someone personal, someone significant. A crossing of the boundaries we had carefully maintained. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "Perhaps dinner at my place next week." The smile that spread across his face was worth any lingering hesitation. "She'd love that. Thank you." As he left to install the plaque at the garden entrance, I remained on the bench contemplating this new development. My son was rebuilding his life, finding happiness again. He wanted me to be part of that life, to know the woman who mattered to him. It was not forgiveness complete that remained a daily choice, a path walked rather than a destination reached, but it was healing, the slow knitting together of what had been savagely torn. That evening I stood on my balcony as dusk settled over Asheville. The mountains faded to purple silhouettes against the darkening sky. Lights winked on across the city, each one representing a life being lived, a story unfolding behind walls and windows. Somewhere among those lights, Jason was perhaps telling Diane about dinner next week. Somewhere Walter was reviewing legal strategies for our newest cases. Somewhere Maya was calling a frightened elder who had just reached out for help. And here in the home I had refused to surrender, I watched night claim the city and felt gratitude rise like a tide, not for the pain, never for that, but for the strength it had revealed, the purpose it had birthed, the community it had created. The slap that was meant to diminish me had instead become the catalyst for a life more meaningful than I could have imagined. The silence I had worn like a cardigan had given way to a voice that carried beyond these mountains, touching lives I would never meet. Charles had been right all those years ago. Invisible wealth builds a shelter. But the richest shelter of all I had learned was a life lived with purpose and dignity intact. As the stars appeared above the mountains, I whispered a truth that had taken 72 years and one public humiliation to fully understand. I am seen, I am heard, and that makes all the difference. The mountains have always been my witness, solid, patient, enduring. Now, as I stood on my balcony watching darkness settle over Asheville, I realized I had become something of a mountain myself, weathered by storms, yes, but still standing, still blooming. The magnolias in my garden would testify to that truth every spring long after I was gone. "You were right, Charles," I whispered to the evening star. "Invisible wealth builds a shelter, but finding your voice that builds a legacy."